Hello everyone, welcome to Highway Dragon Gaming. Skyrim's skill trees all have their own unique strengths, but let's be honest, some perks are completely useless. In this video, I'll go over 5 perks or perk categories that aren't worth your perk points, so you don't waste them. Okay, number 5 on this list is all critical hit, bleeding damage, and armor ignore perks in Skyrim. I grouped these 3 perk categories together because, in practice, they're nowhere near as effective as they sound. Let's start with critical hits. This type of perk appears in the sword perks under one-handed, the great sword perks under two-handed, and the archery perks. They give you a chance to crit enemies. Sounds good, right? The problem is, that damage only scales off the weapon's base damage. According to UESP, even if you put all 3 ranks into this perk, you only get a 20% chance to deal 94% of the base damage as a crit. On average, that's like dealing an extra 19% of the weapon's base damage per hit. For example, an ebony sword has a base damage of 13. That means, on average, each hit only does about 2.5 extra damage. No matter how much you boost your weapon with other perks or smithing, this extra damage always averages out to 2.5. Oh my god, never waste your perk points on this. Next, let's discuss bleeding damage, which only affects one-handed and two-handed axes. It's determined solely by the axe's material. Here's a table showing how much bleeding damage each axe does. Take an ebony axe, for example. Putting just 1 perk gives 10 bleeding damage per hit. That's already 4 times what a rank 3 crit perk would give. Compared to critical hits, it might sound worth taking. But this bleeding damage only works on creatures that can actually bleed. Creatures like Draugr or Dwarven automatons are immune to it. Also, the benefits at ranks 2 and 3 aren't that big, so if you want to put points in, I'd recommend taking just the first rank. Lastly, let's take a look at the perk that lets you ignore armor, which applies to maces and warhammers. The 3 ranks of this perk give 25%, 50%, and 75% armor penetration. Sounds really strong, and honestly, the perk does seem pretty powerful. But in Skyrim, there aren't actually that many heavily armored enemies. For example, animals all have 0 armor in Skyrim, even mammoths have a 0 armor rating. Most Draugr are the same. Even a Draugr Death Overlord only has 2 points of armor, which honestly shocked me when I checked it while recording, because they look like they're wearing really heavy armor. Bandits aren't much better either. The vast majority of them have less than 100 armor. In this tower, only the bandit chief can reach around 174 armor, and if you're lower level, that number is even lower. And against an enemy with 100 armor, even if you fully invest in all 3 ranks of the perk, you're only reducing 75 armor, which works out to about 9% physical damage reduction. So this perk is only useful if your character is high level and actually encounters heavily armored enemies. Otherwise, it's better to save your perk points. Number 4 is Rune Master. If the previous category of perks was just underwhelming, this one is completely pointless. This perk lets your rune spells have 5 times the casting range. If you're just using runes as traps, I honestly don't see much use for the increased range. That said, the perk does make rune spells somewhat viable as combat spells, but they remain costly and deal low damage. For comparison, here's how apprentice-level rune spells stack up against other destruction spells of the same level in terms of damage per magicka. For all 3 damage types, rune spells end up using about 3 times as much magicka to do the same damage as other destruction spells. And since runes can only be placed on the ground or on walls, their usefulness in actual combat is even more limited. So honestly, don't invest in Rune Master unless you're role-playing a rune-focused character. Number 3 is the destruction elemental effects: Intense Flames, Deep Freeze, and Disintegrate. Intense Flames causes enemies to flee at low health when hit by fire spells, while Deep Freeze paralyzes them when hit by frost spells. Both effects trigger at 20% health. Both perks feel pretty awkward. They trigger at low health, when enemies are basically 1 or 2 hits from death anyway. So why bother freezing them or making them flee instead of finishing them off? Freezing isn't too bad, but making enemies run away with fire spells can actually hurt your aim more than it helps. Disintegrate, on the other hand, is actually not bad. This perk causes enemies hit by your lightning spells to turn to ash once their health drops to 15%, and it can even disintegrate dragons. It's basically like all enemies in Skyrim now have 15% less health than before. So, out of these 3 perks, I really only recommend Disintegrate. The other 2 aren't all that useful. That said, if you want your spells to look cooler and make yourself feel like a powerful mage, the other 2 perks can still be fun. After all, Skyrim is a role-playing game.
Do whatever you want.
Number 2 is the entire lockpicking skill tree. Yes, the whole thing. Honestly, if it weren't for making this video, I wouldn't put a single perk into it. First of all, leveling up the lockpicking skill is really slow. I checked a save file of a character at level 48, and my lockpicking was only at 60. Secondly, in Skyrim, locks below expert level aren't really a challenge. And get this, there's a perk that makes expert locks easier at level 75. And for master locks, you need level 100. Oh my god. However, even expert or master locks just make you spend a few more lockpicks. And during normal gameplay, you almost never run out of lockpicks. In my level 48 save, I already had 284 lockpicks stocked up. And the most awkward thing about this skill tree is that the entire thing can be bypassed with a single item. If you get the skeleton key during the Thieves Guild questline and don't continue the questline, you can keep this unbreakable lockpick permanently, which makes every lock in Skyrim ridiculously easy to open. Bethesda realized just how useless this skill tree was, so in Fallout 4, they made it so you can't pick higher level locks unless you put points into the lockpicking perk. Basically, you're forced to spend points on these perks.
All of this just works.
Alright, let's reveal number 1. This perk is even worse than useless, it's downright harmful. I'm talking about the Bullseye perk in the archery tree at skill level 100. Archery in Skyrim can roughly be divided into 2 playstyles. The first is the combat archer, fighting enemies head on. The second is the stealth archer, ambushing enemies from the shadows. The stealth archer is basically one of the most popular builds in Skyrim. If you're playing a combat archer, this perk is totally fine, it's actually a very strong perk. But if you're playing a stealth archer, then never ever take this perk. If this perk works the way we'd expect, you shoot an enemy, the arrow hits, and then the enemy gets paralyzed and falls over, there wouldn't be any problem. But the way this perk actually works is very Bethesda, in the classic it just works kind of way. Just like how the train in Fallout is actually an NPC wearing a train-shaped helmet. What this perk actually does is this. When you fire an arrow, it secretly shoots a paralyze spell from your position, perfectly lined up with the arrow's direction. And here's the problem. When you're shooting from far away, like stealth archers usually do, the paralyze spell is faster than the arrow, so the enemy gets paralyzed and knocked to the ground before the arrow even reaches them. As a result, the arrow just flies right above them. And if this happens during a kill cam, it's insanely annoying. So for stealth archers, this perk ends up being more of a disadvantage. This is literally the worst ultimate perk ever. Don't take it. Alright, that wraps up the 5 most useless perks we're covering today. If I missed a perk you think is totally useless, drop it in the comments. Thanks so much for watching and for all your support.